Morning, everybody. Welcome to our Real Estate on the Ground webinar. You've got at least three handsome faces that are staring at you right now. And I'm going to introduce everybody, but I wanted just to thank all of you out there for tuning in to our latest webinar. This is, I think, what is it, Malcolm? Our third in the series that we're doing. We've got designated 10 of them, and we're moving things around. So you're all on the list. So we'll let you know when the next one is. Probably we'll do another one in a few weeks. But what we're trying to do is tackle the important issues of our time in a way we're concentrating on what, practically speaking, we can do in our businesses, in our practices, to profit and to better our communities and better our profession. And in that spirit, this particular webinar is all about distressed properties and receiverships and so forth, where what we've done in the past, we've sort of set the table with what's been going on in the economy and what's been going on in finance. Now we're going to sort of drill down in this particular webinar to a topic that I know is on a lot of people's minds, and it's sort of what happens after the other shoe drops. You know, we're in a recession. I think what you're going to hear from all of us this morning is that this is not instant recovery. There's virtually no chance of that. As I put out in the describer, we're in for a long slog of a recession, which is quite frankly typical of past recessionary cycles that we've all experienced. We've had different reasons for recessions, but the play out of them tends to have sort of a similar trajectory, at least with respect to length. So the gentlemen whose face you see in front of you this morning are going to share with you from their perspective what some of the issues are right now, and particularly what some of the strategies they and we all would recommend with respect to addressing what we know are going to be a lot of distressed assets, a lot of complicated and convoluted situations going forward. So what I'm going to do as your host, by the way, my name is Gary London. I'm senior principal of London Moeder Advisors, and we are real estate economists, financial advisors, analysts, and we've been in business for just about 30 years. I've been doing this for a tad bit longer than that. So I've seen, I'm thinking about 5.5 recessions in my career, which I always tell people is the good news. It means that there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's always a recovery that comes from it, and I think you're going to hear that from all of us today. And with me, I've got Alan Martin from Sheppard Mullin, Doug Wilson from Douglas Wilson Companies, and of course, Malcolm Davies, my co-host from GF Financial. So we've got the money guy, we got the lawyer, and we've got the seasoned receiver and developer at your webinar. So I think what I'm going to do is turn this over to I guess I'll turn it over to Alan first to talk about from a legal perspective what you guys are seeing, not only just from your perspective, Alan, but certainly that of Sheppard Mullin. You got a big company. You're in the bankruptcy practice group, and I know that. By the way, Alan and I have done some litigation together, so I'm familiar. He's the best. And so we brought him to the table here to chat with you about sort of the legal side of all this, and then we'll go to Doug, and then we'll go to Malcolm, and then what we're going to do after that is sort of open it up to a discussion and invite all of you out there to do Q&A, and we're going to go from now to about 10:30 as we always do. So it's all yours, Alan. Welcome.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it. Appreciate the introduction. Thanks for including me today. I thought I'd give maybe just a brief overview of what I'm seeing, and then we'll kind of weave that into some of our Q&A a little bit later, Gary. As Gary indicated, I've been working with Sheppard for over 30 years, dealing with a lot of commercial distressed real estate over that time period from a variety of perspectives, be it a lot of secured lender work, borrower work, landlord-tenant dynamics, sometimes in construction situations, whether it's office buildings, hotels, et cetera, representing investors, acquirers, and also receivers as well. So for example, Doug and I team up quite often, either getting him appointed as a receiver or representing Doug as a receiver in a variety of very complex situations nationally. So, one thing I want to talk about at the outset, I know folks ask about how does this compare with some of the other, broad economic downturns we've seen in the last 20, 30 years, like the RTC situation, early 90s, the dot-com bubble, and of course, the Great Recession. I actually want to step back from that and talk about what I often see and talk about with clients when there's not a broad-based economic downturn for a moment. There's a reason I'm going to do that. And that is, even during the best of times, there's a lot of distress situations across industries that don't relate to a general economic problem like we have right now. As I share with clients, I have an acronym, which is MOM, M-O-M. And I think that a little bit of that holds true here. And when I say MOM, the acronym stands for, the first M is mismanagement or failure to manage situations well. Okay? We're seeing a little bit of that now because of the pandemic challenges. The O stands for obsolescence. I'll come back to that in a moment. And the other M is malfeasance. And obviously, malfeasance isn't driving the problems here, but sometimes that gets exposed in these situations where folks are starting to kick the tires more, be it lenders, passive investors, what have you. But I want to talk about obsolescence for a minute. And normally, and like I say, in a stronger economic time, the obsolescence comes in where new products come into play, a better phone, something beyond the old Kodak film, where there's now a digital camera or a phone that's taking pictures, and suddenly there's a whole sector that's really been brought to its knees, and we can readily identify that situation, readily identify the distress, and readily identify to a certain extent the exit from that. It could be restructuring through a plan of reorganization. It could be just selling off the assets as best you can, but you pretty much have your arms around the situation fairly early on. The situation we're dealing with right now, Gary, I think is a little different when it comes to obsolescence. I'd almost just call it the unknown. We're not quite sure yet what the long-term obsolescence is going to be, right? Whether it's, space needs in office buildings, spacing structure within office situations. I know our own firm's considering that with various offices and thoughts of how we're going to handle that going forward. Geographic needs, how many people are actually going to need to be officed in a heavily populated area as opposed to working remotely. Travel practices, as it deals with flying, and also hotels. So there's that obsolescence that I think all the perspectives I'm dealing with right now, whether it's lenders, borrowers, receivers, we're all trying to get our arms around that a little bit more. And I think that's going to be interwoven through not only my comments the rest of the hour, Gary, but others too, because each angle or perspective is trying to figure out what it's all going to mean midterm, short term, long term, and how we're going to react to it going forward.
Okay, good. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Doug. Doug and I have known each other since the early '80s or mid '80s, I guess, and he's quite a bit older than me, but we've been through a few events, and Doug did something really brilliant when he formed his company. He is sort of a counter strategy to his sort of traditional upbringing as a developer. He formed Douglas Wilson Companies as a receiver and as a company that specializes in distressed properties. And I always say, and I'm only bringing that up in the context of my introduction to you, because one of the strategies that everybody ought to be considering is looking at other business ventures and not putting all of your eggs in one basket, and looking across different business lines. In my mind, you're the master of it. You did this better than anybody I've ever seen over the last 30 years. So I'm going to get, I'll find something negative to say about you later, but I wanted to offer.
Well, Gary, thank you for those kind words, and it's great to be here this morning with Malcolm and Alan as well. And And Gary, I have no concern. I'm sure you'll come. There's lots of room for negativity, but we'll save that for later. But, you know, thank you for setting the table as far as the background of why I've had the credibility to be here this morning. You know, as you well know, I moved to San Diego and developed Symphony Towers. I was very young, in my 30s, and it was really, you know, even today, a landmark project at 1.2 million feet. But while I did that, I previously had lived in Colorado, and I watched all of my friends in the 80s going broke because of the energy collapse that impacted the Western United States. So I was living a very bifurcated life with developing this massive project here, and then contrary, watching my friends go broke because of the impact of this economic cycle. So to get to your point, I learned about cycles early on, about the power and inevitability of the impacts, particularly on real estate and liquidity of real estate. So, you know, in '89, when we sold Symphony Towers, I said, I got to figure out how to make money in bad times, not just good times. Had a good friend, a lawyer, explain a remedy under a defaulted deed of trust to assist to step in, to really act as a fiduciary, a court-appointed neutral, to look after assets, to manage assets, to stabilize assets, to enhance value for those assets. So in these ensuing years, we obviously have grown that into a national profile and done 1,000 matters involving lots of assets. But as to today and where we are, you know, what I've always tried to do is to follow cycles, because I'm a huge proponent that, you know, nothing is static, everything is subject to change. And as someone with our institutional credibility and relationships, I'm often called the canary in the coal mine. When things start to begin to percolate to the surface, we get calls about, hey, what's happening? And so, you know, for the last 4 or 5 years, things were not that active in the world of distress, but for the typical partnership disputes and the like that are ongoing in life. However, about a year ago, the phone began to ring more. This is pre-COVID. And we began to see certain assignments where certain projects, because we had been long in the cycle at that point anyway, were beginning to show some fractures. So, you know, I used to say that cycles often happen from some event unpredictable and external. Lo and behold, something like a pandemic, who would have figured? And so when that occurred early this year, you know, it really froze the entire system. And so I think that today, I think what everyone will find of considerable interest is what has happened in these past 6 months. How does that set the table for the foreseeable future and the few years ahead? And how does that impact real estate in the world of distress? As I have often stated, you know, we have lived for the last 6 months in a period of what I call shock and awe and forbearance at every level. I mean, at the consumer level, at the renter's level, at the CMBS level, and at every capital source and food group. And that is going to be, I think, the case until the end of the year. But as Warren Buffett once said, when the tide goes out, you see you still has their bathing suit on. And I think that the inevitability of dealing with the reality of some of these upside down distressed situations are going to percolate more to the surface. You know, in closing, I think the state of the market is something that we should all be very focused on and be realistic about. I learned long ago to be a myopic developer, to think that the sun will always shine is not the way to be successful long term. And so, you know, the role of a receiver that I've done over 1,000 times is really one to enhance value. It doesn't have to be a draconian, dark solution. In fact, it can be a methodology and a solution to actually have someone step in with, doesn't have a dog in this fight, to actually take over assets, referee assets, and to enhance value of those assets. And so we can discuss that in much more detail later. But again, thank you for having me this morning, and back to you, Gary.
Okay, excellent. So let's wind it up with you, Malcolm. What's going on in the capital markets? By the way, before you start, I just wanted to remind the panelists to open up your chat rooms, because we're starting to get questions there, and I want you to have an opportunity to think about it. questions, because I'll pose everybody's out there's questions as well as my own in a moment. So Malcolm, what's going on with, what's the current state of the capital markets?
Yeah, I mean, look, thanks for having me again, Gary, and appreciate doing these with you. And Alan and Doug, thanks for joining us. This one is an appropriate timed, webinar. And in some sense, I'm generally the person that folks would like to go to in essence, so that they don't see Alan and Doug in some sense. The reality is, that getting liquidity is part of our jobs. And so, we started this process, I think, going into this COVID scenario back in March, where we thought about how are we going to assist our clients and the like in regards to certain asset classes that we could sense were going to be much more distressed than others, and that particularly hits really obviously the hospitality and retail sectors, and obviously to a certain extent the office sectors. But we represent entrepreneurial sponsors and really implementing and executing on their institutional commercial real estate pursuits. And that means that a lot of these folks, have a certain number of people in their organization, but they leverage our team and organization as their kind of outsourced CFO desk. And in that sense, we're giving them advice about what we can do and what we think can happen. I will tell you, in March and April, we didn't know about PPP. We didn't know that forbearance agreements would be the soup du jour this year and this time, unlike I think last time, where forbearance was like, really? No, we're going after it and we're going to start exercising our remedies. So much like Doug and Alan and Gary, respectfully, you might have a year or two on me, but I somehow got myself into a pickle in the last cycle. And these guys know that in 2008 and 2009, I spent more time in Chapter 11 and Chapter 7 and buying notes and figuring things out that I'd ever like to do in my early 30s. And so we went out and talked to everybody and said, look, we will bring, we call it relief capital, rescue capital to all of these types of transactions. We started to do that, ultimately bringing that capital to the market and recognize that it really wasn't needed yet. And so there's a lot of questions going on as we go into the latter part of this year and how the capital markets are perceiving the world. And it's frankly not visible exactly to everyone's perspectives. I mean, do we know if a vaccine comes out, does that ultimately create a V? Gary, does certain elements jump right back? And the answer, nobody truly understands or knows, but we have to be prepared for all sorts of circumstances. There is a lot of capital, much different than last time. So the reality is this is not a financial recession, in my opinion. This is created by something that's outside of our realms, but now it's percolated into a financial recession because of those factors. The question is going to be, how do we take that capital and does it come into being in B pieces in actually the notes to help financial institutions? Is it actually coming in as preferred equity, mezzanine positions to help insert liquidity into assets? Is it across portfolios, right? Injecting money into good assets to protect the bad assets, right? So in some sense, we've seen this last 6 months, multifamily has been very little affected by what's gone on. I mean, obviously you've seen rates guys go down into the 2s for permanent financing from the agencies. We've been able to really get construction loans done, bridge loans done, permanent loans done. But that's really been kind of the belle of the ball, that and industrial for obvious reasons because of logistics and the fact that I now shop on Amazon more than I shop in a store. And that was not the case for someone like me before COVID. And so that accelerated a lot of folks into different elements. So long story short of it is, the reality is we don't know necessarily exactly how it's going to play out. I will tell you that we have to be prepared for all of it. And one thing I do know is talking with lenders and folks in the regulatory world, the length of forbearance will end. And so that forbearance period likely will end at the end of this year and into early next year. The question is going to be, what does the world look like when that occurs? Because, being forced at that point to make all of your payments, but you don't get it from the asset really means that we're going to all have to have these dialogues to figure things out. So that's a little bit of what's going on in the world and what stuff we've been doing. And I'm really intrigued to hear more about what Alan and Doug, what strategies potentially folks should be thinking about, as they get into the latter part of the year.
So let me, good summary. And I think that in our preparation for today, we had a version of this conversation, and I have a sense of what's going to sort of percolate out here. But before we do that, I thought what would be helpful is just to do, let's go around and maybe each of us can offer up a comment on where we are in terms of the state of the economy from your own perspective. We're getting questions from the audience on that already. And then I also want to sort of drill down briefly and talk about each of the food groups, because this event and what comes from it is going to impact each of the real estate sectors differently. So maybe I'll just start out by offering up briefly my own perspective. I think, technically we're already in recovery. I mean, we are seeing improvements in terms of the job market and so forth. But I don't really think a true recovery starts, and I've shared this often, until we're inoculated, until most of us are inoculated. So this issue of when do we get the vaccine, to me, is the baseline. That's when we start the clock to determine how long it is from recovery to stabilization. My own sense is that even under the best scenario, even if we continue job growth and economic improvement, regardless of who's president, over the next year, we can't get back to where we were pre-COVID for at least another year. So, I mean, that's where, that's the minimum measurement. That takes out this whole point of V recovery. Doesn't address how long it takes or who recovers first and so forth. But I think we're talking about the long slog, and that's why I sort of started our description of this webinar that way. With respect to the different real estate food groups, what's happening out there affects the different sectors differently. We had a robust discussion in our preparatory meeting yesterday amongst the four of us about the office market. And clearly what we're seeing is that there's going to be less of a need for office space. How much of a less of a need and how that sort of plays out, we're not exactly sure. But we know that in this grand experiment, which where people are working at home as most of us are, at least much of the time, it's going to compress the demand for office space. It's also going to put a lot of pressure, not only on tenants, but certainly landlords, at least when they see the leases expire. Are companies going to renew their leases? Are they going to renew as much space? What kind of different space requirements are they going to have? So the office market is going to be impacted. That's not to say that people aren't going to go back to office. They will. I like less to use the term new normal. I think we're going to go back to some normal at some point, and people will go into offices because there is a social need, there is a need for interaction. But clearly there's going to be some version of hybrid that is going to impact the office market in a major way. With respect to the retail sector, we're going to see huge changes on the ground in retail. We're going to see a situation where there's going to be a lot of failures, restaurants and retail and so forth. And this goes to Malcolm's comment about buying at Amazon. People are getting comfortable with that. And certainly we've been doing a lot of business in evaluating distressed shopping centers, which are sort of being reimagined with some other sort of dominant anchor, perhaps residential now, with a smaller retail footprint. So we're going to see a lot of changes in the retail sector. I don't see, and this is where the jury was still out, I don't see a lot of changes in residential. There's still a shortage of housing, and I think that's the dominant factor here. And I don't see anything near the kind of distress in the residential sectors that we saw during the last time. So I think that's the safe sector. We can talk about more about that later if we want. And then hotels are just frankly a debacle. I mean, the hotel industry is going to see probably the most distress, the longest term problems going forward, a lot of transition of the built environment to other uses. So that's sort of my quick tour of what's going on with respect to the sector. Anybody want to weigh in on that? Disagree with me or or enhance the audience's understanding of what's going on?
Gary, this is in response to a couple of chat questions as well. Someone asked about, gosh, I'm not seeing a big list of fire sale listings, REO properties and things right now.
Yeah, time, right?
Yeah, and the answer is, their question is, am I missing the list? And the answer is no. And so I think a couple things, weaving back to your question, is there is no list right now. There is, I know there's that proverbial phrase, kicking the can down the road. Following up on one of Malcolm's comments earlier, I agree with him, both from a borrower and a particular lender perspective, that we're in forbearance mode still now for a variety of reasons. One, because of what caused this crisis was not bank or lender driven, unlike the last downturn, first off. So you don't have the same regulatory pressure yet. I think that will change more toward the end of the year. I agree with Malcolm. We're going to see cooling off on the forbearance and more looking at individual deals there. The PPP situation, folks can debate the effectiveness of that, but clearly that's kind of delayed some of the pain in this situation for a variety of fronts. I think a lot of restaurants are hanging on by the skin of their teeth still. And so in the food and beverage industry, I think we're going to see more fallout there. So I think a lot of things are going to come to pass over the next few months, including the ending or near ending of some of the moratoria with regards to evictions and foreclosure steps and the like. So I see all that changing, and I do see, I don't think we've hit rock bottom yet from that perspective yet. With regards to the recovery, I referenced at the outset that the term of obsolescence, whether that's the right term or not, maybe it's the unknown, because I'm not sure what's going to shake out here with regards to that new normal. I know a lot of folks I talk to, whether they're lawyers or other professionals, by way of example, I think people will go back to the office to a certain extent. I think that's going to be somewhat competition driven, right? Because if your competition's not having meetings at their offices with clients and the like, then there may be less pressure for you to do that. Similarly, if there's competition's not out on the road visiting clients, then there's less pressure there to fly or to stay in hotels. So I think that we won't go back to the same. I think there will be more hoteling, if you will, in office space, which was already being contemplated. I think there's going to be more of that. I expect more instances of folks, sharing space, maybe being in this office, 50% of the time. With regards to sectors, completely agree. I think on the hotel front, we have a large hospitality group, so I'm tied into that, and I agree with your observations on that. I think some of the hotels, hospitality situations that could be better are those one-offs that are right off a freeway or something like that. They're not hosting the big meetings and things of that sort, but they seem to be doing better. And the other areas I completely agree with. And if I could circle back with regards to that fire sale question, I suspect that you're not going to see a long list of REO properties probably till first quarter, second quarter of 2021 at the earliest. And I know we're going to talk about some of the things like portfolio sales in a minute, but that's my initial observation.
So, if I may, Gary, to chime in on that, it's I'm often asked, where are we in the baseball game and what inning? And I think we're in the first inning. I mean, the reality is, as so much capital's out there, as Malcolm articulated, but the world of distress, everybody bots distress, but as Alan just said, there is no distress at this point. But that distress is just like this pent up, it's being pent up against the wall, the dike, and at some point that's going to break. And it's substantially later than any of us would have thought. And it's one size does not fit all. It depends where you are in the country, depends on the asset class, but particularly, some with hotels being at the top of the food chain of distress are going to be a big problem. We have dealt with hotels all over the country, ski areas, resorts, golf courses, and the like for decades. But going into this cycle, we formed a venture with a guy, Tom Corcoran, who founded Felcor. He's a real legend in the hotel industry, because we see that there's going to be a big influx of hotels that come into receivership, particularly the full service hotels, as we just indicated, the ones that are on the coast that are more resort oriented, can bounce back, limited service and the like. But, that sector is going to be particularly hit. Office, I think you've touched on. I mean, there's so many unknowns of office. We're all dealing with that. We're all dealing with that in our own offices. Do we extend our leases? Do we wait and see? You know, there's a compelling argument in the article rather, in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about what's happening in Manhattan. And it's really rather staggering. So, you know, everyone that says, let's get back to the way it used to be is naive and myopic. The new reality is as yet fully undefined, but you have to be ready for it and be agile to adapt to it. You know, I just think that that's really the compelling issue. You know, what is happening that we are seeing now in advance of real estate is certain operating companies are having issues. We're seeing partnership disputes are beginning to percolate to the surface. I think that's very symptomatic of cycles. When things are going well, everybody gets along, but when issues begin to come to the surface, everyone gets out and starts pointing the fingers. And so we're seeing a lot of that, and you know, that often is the foundation of a lot of potential distress in the assets that are involved in those disputes. So, you know, I'm not doom and gloom, but I think I'm realistic in the sense that on its surface, things seem to be getting better. The unemployment's coming down and the like, but under the surface, longer term, there are still significant systemic issues out there at many levels of the economy that aren't going to go away. And I think this will go on for a couple of years.
And the one thing that I think to that point is to really we've never seen so much stimulus pumped into our economy so quickly.
Did PPP just delay things, Malcolm?
I mean, potentially, I think it also makes it trickier to maybe underwrite where the world's going to go. So, for example, you I think have 40 million Americans today that do not have an obligation to make a student loan payment. What does that mean? It means they have maybe a little more liquidity to spend elsewhere and the like, which includes rent. You know, the reality is, how about the unemployment checks? I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of unemployment that's been pushed out, which I think was absolutely warranted. You know, you look at our unemployment today down to 8.4%. I don't think any of us on this panel would have thought and seen that when unemployment was getting close to 20%. So in that sense, you know, stimulus was pumped out in hopefulness that we get to a resolution, you know, with either a vaccine or a therapeutic or something to that magnitude and that gets us into normality. But I think the stats are staggering as it relates. I think someone had asked a question about it's a K recovery. You know, there's probably some truth to that, frankly. I mean, if you look at travel counts, right? TSA is something we pay attention to. You know, on Monday, there were 960,000 travelers that went through TSA checkpoints in the United States. That was the largest it's been since I think March 11th, right? That's still down 60% from the normal numbers of 2.3, 2.4, 2.5 million people, you know, per day. That's going to have an absolute effect on folks that are either, you know, for commerce, for just TOT occupancy for municipalities. I mean, we're not even getting into the issues that, you know, when we do convert potentially hotels, which I do think is a big opportunity here for, you know, conversion of hotels to multi-family for a temporary solution, right? But TOT, how are we going to pay the bills in some of these places? Convention business, we spent a lot of money on how we did commerce before, and how long will that take to come back? So as that relates to the K, you see that being on the bottom. And then the other side of it, you do see, you know, a lot of this e-commerce dynamic. You know, tech companies are they're just gangbusters. I mean, they're doing incredibly well. But to that point, you're seeing really interesting things happen. Pinterest cancels a lease, right? They were going to take 50% occupancy in a building that Alexandria is building today. They paid a $90 million, fee to get out of that lease. Now, I think we talked about this previously. That's probably okay for Alexandria because they're going to take what was about 20% of the cumulative amount of that lease, hopefully get another tenant in the next 2 years. But that's the work for home thing. I mean, how is that going to affect the office market eventually, right? They don't believe that you need to have it. So I don't know. I think a lot of the stuff we're seeing today is certainly none of us truly understand, but I definitely believe that we've got to pay attention to how the world's going to unwind, how the recovery. I would like to ask Alan a question about, you know, the bankruptcy courts themselves. You know, one of the things that, you know, how folks can look at bankruptcy courts and use COVID as the reason why they had to go into bankruptcy, and how will the bankruptcy courts react in essence to owners that are utilizing bankruptcy to reorganize, for example. Is that going to be different this time? Going in towards, getting a DIP loan, for example, from a bankruptcy court who may think that there's a better positioning way to get to the next side because there's a recovery potentially. Is that going to be different this time?
I think it's going to be, and I've kind of seen that so far, Malcolm, on a variety of fronts. A lot of the cases I've dealt with in the last few months across the country have been more operating companies, but they've also had a lot of office space, manufacturing space, et cetera. And because it's so systemic and funding to buy a building or build a building is really not a culprit this time, or not used as a culprit as it was last time, I think there's a lot more flexibility. I've noticed judges, although they're always concerned about it, right now, one of their themes is how do we save jobs? Whatever maneuver that's going to happen, whether it's a DIP loan, whether it's a 363 proposal, how can we save jobs? And that's a common theme time and time. So I do feel there's a little patience there. I think the bankruptcy judges admittedly don't feel like they figured it out themselves yet about what the causes are in a lot of situations. One thing I wanted to follow up on was a comment by you and also as Doug, is there's not a one-size-fits-all situation here. So whether it's, I saw some of the chat questions about sectors, geographic components, et cetera. And I want to mention a couple of things to keep in mind what I'm seeing, and that is a lot of fine institutions, a lot of fine financial institutions and banks, but at this portion of the cycle, they're typically relatively understaffed with regards to their workout groups, and they're building up, much like they do in each cycle. And so that's I'm sorry?
The under-experienced too. I mean, one of the things.
Yes, and so as they staff up, you've got a lot less experience. You don't have a whole lot of old salts there. So as a result of that, it is all the more critical that if you're either dealing with an existing loan as a borrower, or you're looking to maybe step in and buy a note or something, you really need to try to connect the dots for the bank as much as possible as to why your proposal, your situation works, okay? Because you have inexperienced folks in many cases dealing with non-cookie cutter situations. So whether it's your attorney, whether it's your workout consultants, someone like Malcolm, or if it's someone like Doug as well coming in, it's critical to have folks that have the right experience in that segment and that sector. Particularly like, you can't just appoint any receiver in any case and just feel like they can address any problem situation across the board. You need someone who has real experience in a particular sector, not only get buy-in from the lender, but also a buy-in from potential buyers as well.
Malcolm, are we going to have a crisis that can come out of this thing? If the banks get caught with their notes, get caught holding the bag on a bunch of assets, is that going to set the stage for, Doug talked about unknowns. Could the banking sector get in trouble over the next couple of years?
I frankly don't think so. I actually believe that the banking sector did learn some lessons from the last downturn. Not a heavy, one thing, for example, you didn't have a lot of banks highly levered with condo inventory, for example. Condos are a little bit of a riskier asset class. And hospitality, for example, the hospitality financing generally was pushed towards specialty finance / debt funds in this last cycle. So I think banks probably own only about, on their commercial real estate lending, about 5 to 7% of their portfolio are in hotels. So in that regard, since that was the case, I think they've been well positioned. We do think that there's going to be some levels of stress about, certain assets and how those will unwind. And the reality is liquidity will help a lot of different, borrowers, but not always, right? At some point, I talked to some of my institutional clients who own large, big box hotels that cater to conventions and large MSAs, right? And they're looking at it and saying, well, should I keep these assets or should I not? Should I move on to looking at other stuff? And so you're already seeing those decisions. We financed the hotel in Midtown Manhattan last week, and 2 weeks ago, I should say. And, it was an institutional sale to almost an institutional buyer. And they decided to walk away from a significant loss from an asset they bought in 2017. Why? It's part of the fund. It was just absorbed, and they were able to move forward on their business plans and not put good money after bad. So the question is really, how does the world change? Or how do the capital markets look at things? And I've always tried to tell people, debt right now is like the new equity in some sense, because I think this is going to turn into an incredible equity investment market for all sorts of different things. You're seeing the growth of different types of assets today. You know, for example, you have this built-to-rent product that's multifamily, where you have direct access doors that you can go in, where you don't have to go up elevators and stairs. That stuff's leasing like gangbusters, so to speak, in those different markets that they're in. You need a lot of land for that stuff. So the question really is development deals, investment returns, and then how much distress are we really going to have? In the equity world, it has got a lot of opportunities in front of them. The lenders, they just want to get their money back, right? So that's been a bit of a tricky challenge to make sure we can get accretive debt, you know, for our clients. And, you know, leverage is down, no question. If I just told somebody that where's leverage, 5 to 10% less leverage for the same pricing that you had expected before, across the board, permanent and the like. Just the thresholds of underwriting are much more stringent. But I would tell you that there is lending out there. And the reality is, if you look at it and say, okay, I'll take the 5 to 10% less. Maybe my equity returns go down from my underwriting, but you know, I have a safe loan. That's there. And so that's different than in 09, 10, and into 11. You know, I remember doing deals in 11, trying to go out to the market and get a construction loan for an apartment project. You know, I'd go to 300 lenders, you know, and get one. You know, that's not the case today. You don't have to go that wide.
So, Doug, I want to make sure that, you know, these conversations go really quick, and it's already 10 after 10. And I want to make sure that we get to what I really want to get to, which is strategies for our listeners. I mean, all of us have had a lot of experience in our own fields dealing with situations like this. But I want to, and one of the concerns I have is that there's a lot less institutional memory of what has happened before. A lot of new people that are in the business now who haven't had these experiences before. So maybe we'll start with you, Doug. I'd like us to just give advice to people of what they should do to sort of prepare for sort of the stage that we just set in terms of the next few years.
Well, Gary, I think that's a very thoughtful approach and a big topic that we should focus on, because look, I think for everyone to understand, it's like, from my perspective, you know, I live in a bifurcated world. Okay, I've built $1 billion of projects as a principal, and I've taken over 15 billion in distress. So in between, I have dealt with the realities of what it's like to be a principal in these cycles. I had Lehman as a partner personally. So I understood what it was like to be dealing with our own challenges as individuals, as evidenced by where you stand in the real estate cycle. In the advice that I would really give today, because you're right, there are so many individuals that are active that don't have any historical memory, either in the institutions or in the development front, the principal front, of what it was like in the past or how we dealt with these issues in the past. Is that, you know, there's some basic fundamental issues that I think are foundational. One is be forthright, be direct, be honest, don't hide the P. There's no shame in getting involved in a situation that may be struggling, oftentimes due to no circumstances under your control. And so, you know, I think when people try to get fast and loose and cute with whoever their capital partner may be, it may be a bank or it may be a debt fund or whomever it might be, I typically that ends in a bad way, and they're probably going to call me and I'm going to take over the project. And so I think if there's a fundamental thing that people should really look to is be realistic, don't be myopic, you know, don't be a dreamer and underwrite what the future's going to look like under the best of circumstances. Have realistic assumptions as you go forward in operating your business or any of your assets. And if in fact you run into difficulty, deal with it in a forthright, indirect way. I think everyone will respect that. I think the resolution is typically going to be greatly enhanced for all parties. So if there's any sage advice I'd offer, it'd be that.
Can people come to you, Doug, give you a call before the shit hits the fan? And can you be helpful in that regard? Yes,
yes, we are often consulted, as you can imagine, on how to behave in these situations, or what do I do, you know, before a problem really percolates to the surface or gets really difficult. So yes, I think to have advice and guidance is something that we have done often through the years. And I think, you know, we're seeing an uptick in that right now.
Yeah.
And that's going to continue, obviously.
Good. Hey, Alan, I see partnership disputes. I see people pointing fingers at each other who's at fault. I mean, as an expert witness doing a lot of litigation work over the years, you know, I get some of the negative end of this working for guys like you. Well, are you seeing, give some advice on the ground to either prevent or deal with or prepare for the inevitable things we're going to see on the legal and litigation front as deals go bad, because deals are going to go bad and people are going to be pointing those fingers, and they're going to be partners disputes. They're going to be lender, lender disputes. There's going to be family disputes. There are going to be a lot of issues out there. Any advice that you want to give, both in the preparation side, as I asked Doug, and sort of how to sort of address those storms that are ahead of us?
Sure, thanks. You know, I started the hour talking, using that acronym of MOM. I've talked a lot about the unknown or obsolescence, and this kind of ties back into the two M's, you know, allegations of mismanagement and also malfeasance. Doug alluded to, I think, the Buffett metaphor about when the tide goes out, news still has a swimsuit on. We're seeing a lot of that. You know, the mismanagement front, I think there is always situations with true mismanagement. And then you've also got, for lack of a term, kind of the force majeure situation we're dealing with right now. So it may not be so much mismanagement into the past, but how folks react going forward, right? And avoiding questioning that. So I think what I encouraged, if we're in a potential partnership dispute, is making sure you're very aware of what your rules of the road are with regards to partnership agreement. Are you carrying some of Doug's things before, are you being transparent, realistic with your partners? Are you being forthright with them? Are you including them in the process? Because there's a lot of room for not only transparency and realism here, but you know, some flexibility and in some areas room for creativity, not only within your partnership group, but also with your lenders here. Now, I painted a little bit of a shadow or dark picture earlier about dealing with lenders who may not have a lot of experienced workout folks. And that's also an opportunity, though, because I think if you can be forthright, active with those lenders and confront them with both your problems and also your solutions, I think there's going to be more flexibility there in this downturn. So I would say, you know, don't kick the can down the road. Be forthright with other people within your ownership group, if you will. Be forthright with your lenders. I know it can sometimes be a little more challenging, CMBS special servicers, right? But you have no choice but to keep pushing that as much as you can. Make sure you have the right experts on the bus with you. And also, circling back one last item to Malcolm, his question about the courts. I found the courts also more willing to be flexible beyond just a view of concerns of jobs, more flexible about alternative remedies. I'll share one example right now, Gary. I've seen this time that lenders, in many cases, not all, because they're not sure what the future holds, may be willing to hold off on foreclosure for a period of time and not immediately seek relief and stay, but maybe work with the debtor on a 363 sale process, maybe even help fund some of the expenses of that process. But in return, they are the stalking horse, utilizing a credit bid, stalking horse to get the process going and kickstarted. I know that might have been laughed at a court the last downturn, but here there's been receptivity with that, not only with the parties, but also the court as well. So takeaways: be honest, be realistic, be forthright, and be creative as well.
One thing that I think right now that's probably a little bit different than last time, at least what we're seeing, is that, you know, they're, at least right now, their lenders and borrowers are saying to each other, we're in this together in some sense, right? That's why you have seen a bit of this forbearance. Unfortunately for all, this is a secured creditor, you know, that has their rights and they want to get paid back. So at some point, you know, that forbearance will end. I have seen some questions that I would like to probably address before we end the whole hour here, but you know, folks have referenced the Main Street lending program. It's been very ineffective, guys. It's just not been. There's been some challenges with it. Frankly, Recourse is one of them. It has been a bit of a challenge to roll out. None of the banks have really thought that the 5%, the 15% risk retention they would take into the assets on that financing has been attractive for them. So that's been something that just all of you guys can pay attention to. As it relates to, I think going and seeing realism, lenders, and transparency, I can't stress enough, I have personal experience in this. I was a developer in the last cycle. Frankly, I spent 4 years working on problems, and I've seen how long it takes. I think, in some sense, this dynamic that's going on in the world today, we're super early and we don't know every little part of it. I just can't stress enough that since we don't know every part of it, we should be prepared for all of it as much as we can. Here we have two of the greatest experts in the space, being able to manage, what could be a challenging situation. But I can't stress enough, the more open you are, the more honest you are. Look, I think I've told people this for the last 10 years. I was a guy in 2009 that filed a $55 million Chapter 7 bankruptcy at the age of 32, turning 33. That was not fun. I do not want to be back there. I never will want to get back there. But just to give people that perspective, we have a heavy heart as it relates to the financing side. So be open and honest and share and talk to the guys like Alan and Gary and Doug and myself about some of the things that are going on. But again, I'm not as bearish, I think, maybe as Gary might be, I think, in regards to where we're going. Doug and Alan, I think they have their perspectives about where things could go. That being said, I can't tell you that for a fact that we're going to be all roses, because frankly, we probably aren't going to be. And how the heck are we going to manage it? I will tell you that liquidity is pretty good. And so how do we challenge? The challenge of the liquidity is, what is the basis of all of these deals? How much mezzanine financing do you have? What is the last dollar basis of the loan? All of those things are pretty much the challenge, because what seemed like a really good basis for a lender 2 years ago probably doesn't look so hot and so good today. So I'll leave those are my last kind of comments as Doug and Gary and Alan kind of round the horn on stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I want to be labeled a bear. I'm an optimist by nature. I'm an optimist by nature, and I want to make sure that people understand that my own perspective is, capitalism is inefficient. There are different causes. Usually they're outliers like this one that cause recessions and economic events, and we'll be creative in terms of our ability to come back. But I think the better word is sobriety. I think we need to be really sober with respect to the prospects and look at all the angles in terms of time frame, in terms of what you can do with the assets. A lot of the questions that I'm seeing come across the chat room right now relate to, what do I do with hotel? What do I do with office? What do I do with residential? Are we moving out of the cities? All these things. And I don't have, I don't think any of us have sort of the magic answer to all these things. They're all going on. And I think I think what I'd like to advise people is to look at all of your options. A lot of what we do are trying to understand the market and doing a lot of different financial sensitivities of different outcomes. That's what we're doing with clients right now in preparing for how to deal with distressed assets. We don't reoccupy the space as an office building. Should we convert it? Or should we tear it down? Or should we walk away? There are lots of different kind of exit strategies that I think I would advise people to be looking at, so that you're not caught missing something. And it all goes back to what I think every one of you are saying, which is just be honest with your partners and be honest with yourself. Be able to look in the mirror and say, I looked at everything. I did the best I could do. And I think we'll all live to fight another day, regardless of how long this takes or what strategies we want to overcome. And I think with respect to what you said, Malcolm, there is a lot of capital out there. There's been a lot of discussion in the national media about, this sort of two-tiered economy where all of us who have assets in the stock market are making money, and then people on Main Street who own stores and shops and restaurants and work for a living in these service or retail areas aren't doing as well. And I think that, what it says is that there's a lot of capital out there, and some of that capital will be reformed to create funds. We always see this, to buy distressed assets. So there's a strategy that, there's strategies out there to sort of react to that. And I think that, I think the byword of the day is flexibility. And with respect to the built environment, the good news is that you can do lots of things with buildings. We're demonstrating that with shopping centers that we're looking at. We've seen lots of assets that are single-use assets, old office buildings, hotels, and so forth, which can be converted, and they will be. And we saw this happening before this event. If anything, this evolution of change in terms of real property assets in cities in America has become a revolution. The COVID has caused it to turn into revolution of change in terms of what we do with assets. So there's always something out there to do. But the thing is, right now, what our real message is, I think, with this panel is be prepared and be really, really flexible. And then all these issues which we're sort of discussing, but we really don't know the answers of with respect where it affects the most, what food groups it affects the most, what's the time for the recovery, and so forth. Those are going to play out the way they play out. The main thing is that we're all ready to go.
The one thing I'll leave you with is that I've been telling lots of our clients this, and particularly if you have a bit of a challenge, that if we bring in new capital, generally that capital will look at the last dollar it's at and perceive what risk it is. And it does involve some levels of dilution, and that becomes problematic, right? Folks are looking at it and going, do I want to be diluted? And it depends how bad this is. And so if it's in a real bad spot, 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing. And the reality is that dynamic will likely play itself out going into 21 on certain types of deals. Not all, of course, but we're trying to figure out that kind of solution, which is kind of participating preferred equity structures and the like. But you're going to see a lot of stuff. Last thing on micro units, I would tell everybody, I think that if we're trying to save or put together hotels that are in challenge, I think having a portion of those hotels be micro unit multi, at least for a period of time, could be a really good solution to help hotels survive for a period of time.
Yeah. We've got a couple minutes remaining. Did I miss anything, guys? Anything that we?
I saw one other question I might hit quickly, following up on your point, Gary, and someone was asking about opportunities, maybe not as to their current assets, but otherwise. All the things we've said today about flexibility, awareness, et cetera, certainly hold true if you're looking to acquire new situations. I think there's going to be a lot of good opportunities. Some may be the right ones for you with regards to 363 sales. And secondly, with regards to the Doug Wilsons of the world, when they're out there in the receivership mode, opportunities to buy assets from them and take advantage of certain abilities to get certain problematic aspects of a property shed, where there might be certain leases, liens, claims of that sort. So I think there's some good opportunities going forward. The last point I will just mention is that lenders have long memories, and I mean this in a positive way. And so if you are straight with them and have been straight with them in the past, not only are they more flexible on current deals, they may be more amenable to looking to you as a resource for possible note sales as well. So look out for some good note sale opportunities. I think probably Q4, more Q1, Q2 of 2021.
In closing, I'd just like to say that, it's really easy to get caught up in the moment and to say, hey, it's the end of the world. Nothing will ever be right again. I mean, the reality is we live in a complicated world. It's very tenuous geopolitically. We all understand that and know that. But at the end of the day, the sun will come up in some way, but it's going to be a different dynamic. And again, just to be flexible moving into that and being open as to what that might be is going to, I think, you'll be in a much better solution to be successful longer term. It's something that I've been a serial entrepreneur for 40 years, and you got to change every day. You got to change yourself and reinvent yourself and adapt to that ever-changing world. This one's just got some unique fact patterns.
So in closing, I guess what I'm hearing is be flexible, be prepared. Denial is not a good solution. Denial is a river in Egypt. My father always taught me that. I never was able to say that. And I'm looking at three guys who I really trust in each of your respective fields to help my clients and my friends in the industry. So I want to tell everybody out there, don't hesitate to contact any of these guys. They're all the best in the business. And I'm watching the chat room, and I think to one extent or other we've covered most of the questions that were out there. But please, for those of you that do have specific questions of any of us, feel free to email us, and we'll take it from there. I will. Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for including us.
Thank you. Fun.
I will announce shortly. Malcolm and I will put our heads together, and we'll announce shortly when and what the next webinar is going to be. But we're going to tackle yet another subject in a few weeks. We'll be back to you. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Have a great weekend. Stay cool, and I hope that you all profited from this. Thanks again.
Great.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Malcolm.